Hello everyone, I'm Chris, and this is a full recap of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1. Real quick, if you're watching this video and you haven't yet subscribed, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. The MCU is now the largest cinematic universe in film history, starting in 2008 and continuing through to the present. But before its universe expanded into what it is today, there were just the 5 original Avengers: Iron Man, Hulk, Black Widow, Thor, Hawkeye, and Captain America, founded by Nick Fury, and the introduction of these characters took place in the first of multiple phases the MCU is separated into. We'll be taking an in-depth look back on each of the MCU's phases over the coming weeks, starting with the 6 films that took place during Phase 1. The Marvel Cinematic Universe begins with self-described genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist Tony Stark, the CEO of leading military defense contractor Stark Industries, riding in a transport convoy through Kunar, Afghanistan, in the midst of a war following a demonstration of his company's new Jericho missiles before being severely wounded by his own company's weaponry in an ambush and held captive in a cave by the Ten Rings. Held captive along with Stark is Dr. Ho Yinsen, a renowned scientist and surgeon from Afghanistan, whose family was killed before he was abducted by the Ten Rings. To keep the shrapnel that wounded Stark from reaching his heart and killing him, Yinsen built an electromagnet powered by a car battery and placed it in the center of Stark's chest. The Ten Rings kidnapped Stark so that he could build them the Jericho missiles and say they'll set him free if he does. Stark agrees, but instead of creating the Jericho missiles, he and Yinsen work together to build a suit of armor and a powerful electric generator called an arc reactor to power it and Stark's electromagnet. The Ten Rings eventually realize their plans and ambush their workshop, so Yinsen sacrifices himself to allow Stark's suit to power up. Stark then fights his way out of the cave and burns the terrorists' collection of Stark Industries weapons before flying away and crashing into the desert. He's rescued not too long after by a search party led by close friend Colonel James Rhodes, and upon his return he holds a press conference to announce that his company will no longer manufacture weapons, to the dismay of his father's old partner and company manager, Obadiah Stane, who believes this may ruin Stark Industries. Over the next few months, Tony rebuilds and improves upon his original armored suit, as well as a more powerful arc reactor that he has his personal assistant, Pepper Potts, placed in his chest. Meanwhile, as he learns at his first public appearance since the press conference, Stark Industries had recently delivered weapons to the Ten Rings, and it turns out Obadiah Stane signed off on it. Enraged, Tony dons his new suit and flies to Afghanistan, where he saves the citizens of Gulmira from the Ten Rings. When he eventually does return home, he's caught in the suit by Pepper.
Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
Meanwhile, the Ten Rings have gathered the broken pieces of Stark's prototype suit, and Stane meets with their commander, Raza, to retrieve it. In exchange, Raza is expecting an army of iron soldiers, but Stane instead just has him and his men killed. Stane then ambushes Tony at his home, using a sonic taser to paralyze him and take his current arc reactor. He reveals that he put the hit out on Tony that led to his capture, and that now, with his own armored suit built with the pieces of Tony's prototype and arc reactor, he'll take over as CEO of Stark Industries. But first, he has to kill Pepper, since Tony had sent her earlier to hack into the company's computer system to find what other weapons were delivered to the Ten Rings, and in turn, she found evidence of everything Stane had done before exiting with Phil Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, aka SHIELD, who she informs of Stane's activities. Following Stane's exit, Tony is just barely able to crawl to his original arc reactor kept by Pepper before suiting up to fight Stane. Meanwhile, Agent Coulson, Pepper, and other agents of SHIELD find Stane and attempt to arrest him, but he easily takes them out using his Ironmonger suit. He goes to kill Pepper, but Tony shows up just in time to save her. The two fight, with Stane having the upper hand for most of it, due to him having a much larger suit and a more powerful reactor. But Tony still manages to defeat him after luring him to the top of Stark Industries building and instructing Pepper to overload the large arc reactor powering the lab, unleashing a massive electrical surge that causes Stane to fall into the exploding reactor, killing him. The next day, Agent Coulson gives Tony a cover story to explain the previous night's events, but at the subsequent press conference, Tony just improvises.
I am Iron Man.
Afterwards, Tony is met in his home by Nick Fury, director of SHIELD, to discuss the Avengers Initiative. Also on SHIELD's radar for the Avengers Initiative is Dr. Bruce Banner, a renowned scientist commissioned by General Thaddeus Ross to create a serum to enhance human performance. But during the experiment, Banner was exposed to dangerous levels of gamma radiation, causing Banner to transform into a giant rage-fueled monster known as the Hulk when he's angered, provoked, or excited. During his first transformation into the Hulk, he had attacked General Ross and hospitalized his lover, Betty Ross, Thaddeus Ross's daughter. So he was made a fugitive of the US Army and forced to go on the run for years, currently living in Brazil and working at a soft drink bottling factory. But he eventually gets tracked down by Ross after getting a cut and accidentally dripping blood into one of the bottled drinks, causing the death of an elderly man who drank from it. Ross sends an attack team led by British Special Ops Commander Emil Blonsky to capture Banner, but this just causes him to transform into the Hulk for the first time in 158 days. He He easily takes out Blonsky's team before escaping, and Blonsky is left shocked and confused by what he just witnessed. Ross explains to Blonsky what happened with Banner, and although Banner's experiment failed, he still had a team continuing research on the super soldier serum, and even creating one that looks very promising, leading Blonsky to volunteer to receive a small dose. Meanwhile, Bruce has traveled back to the US and reunites with Betty. Betty allows Bruce to stay at her house for the night, but as he's leaving the next day, he's again ambushed by an attack team led by Blonsky, whose speed, strength, and agility has noticeably increased. Bruce transforms into the Hulk, and once again proves to be too much for them to handle, including Blonsky, who he nearly kills with a single kick. Betty is also nearly killed after entering the strike zone, but Hulk saves her from the explosion and escapes with her in his arms. After reverting back into Bruce, he and Betty head to New York to meet with Mr. Blue, the online alias of cellular biologist Dr. Samuel Stearns, who Bruce had been contacting throughout his time on the run in an attempt to rid himself of the Hulk, and who's invented a potential antidote. They test the antidote and it actually works, but they're unsure if it rid him of the Hulk permanently, or only reverse the one individual transformation. Stearns then reveals that he's ran tests before to figure this out by synthesizing Banner's blood into a large supply. Upon learning this, Banner says they have to incinerate all of it so that no one can try and weaponize it. But before they can do anything, Banner is shot with a tranquilizer as Banner is being arrested and escorted onto a helicopter. Blonsky, who had healed completely from his encounter with the Hulk, holds Stearns at gunpoint and forces him to inject him with a sample of Banner's blood, transforming him into Abomination. After knocking Stearns into a sample of Banner's blood, Abomination goes on a rampage throughout Harlem, leading Ross to let Banner go, and a battle between the Hulk and Abomination ensues. Their brawl ends with Hulk nearly strangling him to death with a chain, but he's convinced not to kill him by Betty, so Hulk goes on the run once again while Abomination is sent to the Raft, an underwater prison created for enhanced individuals. Meanwhile, Tony Stark has continued to embrace his superhero persona, even entering the Stark Expo, an event to display the latest and greatest technology in his Iron Man suit. But as he leaves the stage, he notices that his blood toxicity is rising, as well as there being damaged veins around his chest expanding outward. His AI system Jarvis explains that the palladium powering his arc reactor is slowly killing him, and unfortunately, there are no other suitable replacements. Tony's also dealing with pressure from the US government to share his technology with the military, but he fears what could happen if his tech falls into the wrong hands. He also no longer feels that he can handle the responsibility of running Stark Industries, and decides to make Pepper CEO and hires Natalie Rushman to take Pepper's old job, who displays unique fighting skills in an interaction with Tony's personal chauffeur and close friend, Happy Hogan.
Rule number 1, never take your eye off your opponent.
Oh my God!
Tony and Pepper later appear at the Grand Monaco racing track, and Tony, after seeing his condition is continuing to deteriorate, decides on a whim to take part in the race, driving the Stark Industries sponsored car. But as he's driving, he's attacked by Ivan Vanko. Ivan's father, Anton Vanko, was a partner of Tony's father, Howard, and helped create the first arc reactor. However, when Vanko sold his designs on the black market, Stark had him deported. Ivan's father died the same day of Tony's Iron Man reveal at the press conference, leaving Ivan only with blueprints for an arc reactor. Over the next 6 months, Ivan built his own arc reactor and suit with electric whips, and planned to exact revenge on the Stark family. Tony manages to evade most of Vanko's offense, and defeats Vanko once he's suited up. Vanko's then put in prison, but gets broken out shortly after by Justin Hammer, CEO of weapons manufacturing company Hammer Industries, who had formed a strong business rivalry with Tony. Hammer wants Vanko to create Iron Man suits to rival those of Stark so he can improve his company's position, and Vanko agrees. Tony's condition, meanwhile, continues to get worse, and so he throws a party in an attempt to have some fun before he dies. But things get out of hand when Tony gets drunk while wearing his suit, so Rhodey, who was there to keep an eye on Tony due to his erratic behavior, puts on the Mark II suit and forces everyone to leave, leading to a brawl between the two, where they destroy most of Tony's house before Rhodey leaves with the suit and brings it to the US military. Tony heads to a donut shop in the suit the next morning to cheer himself up, where he's met by Nick Fury once again. It's revealed that Tony actually declined his initial offer to take part in the Avengers Initiative, so Fury sent S.H.I.E.L.D. spy Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, to keep an eye on him under the alias Natalie Rushman. Fury reveals they have some of Tony's father's old research that they believe could be useful to him with his condition, and eventually, using his father's research, Tony synthesizes a new element called vibranium, and creates a new, perfected arc reactor that cures his palladium poisoning. Meanwhile, Vanko has completed building an army of Iron Man-like drones, which Hammer presents along with his revamped Mark II suit, given to him by the military at the Stark Expo, with Rhodey donning the suit for the presentation. They're then interrupted by a returning Iron Man, who learned of Vanko's plan after Vanko called him, threatening to do to him in 40 minutes what his father did to his family over 40 years. It turns out Vanko gave himself full control over the drones, as well as Rhodey's suit. So following Tony's arrival, he has the drones and Rhodey's suit attack him. As they fly and brawl throughout the city, Romanoff and Happy Hogan head over to Hammer's facility, where Natasha shows off more of her fighting skills, taking out Hammer's entire security team in the same amount of time it takes Happy to take out a single guard. But unfortunately, Vanko had already escaped. She's able to reboot Rhodey's suit though, and so War Machine and Iron Man team up to take out a swarm of Vanko's drones. Vanko then arrives in an improved and much larger Whiplash suit before attacking them. He has the upper hand for most of their brawl, but Tony and Rhodes manage to defeat him by simultaneously blasting Vanko, creating a huge explosion that kills him. Following their victory, Tony finds Pepper and the two finally finally confess their romantic feelings for one another, sharing a kiss on a rooftop. Later, Fury meets with Tony again and says they no longer believe Tony is suited to be a part of the Avengers Initiative, but they'd still like to keep him on as a consultant. Throughout all this, Agent Coulson had been sent by Fury to New Mexico to recover a mysterious, immovable hammer that crash-landed on Earth. Long ago, in 965 AD, the frost giants of Jotunheim looked to conquer Earth, threatening to plunge the mortal world into a new ice age, but humanity was saved by the Asgardians, led by Odin, king of Asgard. Asgard took the source of their power, the Casket of Ancient Winters, ending the last great war and leading to peace between the 9 realms for over 1,000 years. Over said 1,000 years, Odin and his wife Frigga raised 2 sons, Thor and Loki, with both having desires of one day becoming king. In the present day, Thor, now also known as the God of Thunder, has been chosen and is prepared to become the new king of Asgard. But before Odin can follow through with the proclamation, he senses the presence of intruders. We see that 3 frost giants have infiltrated Asgard in an attempt to take back the Casket of Ancient Winters. But Odin summons the Destroyer, an enchanted Asgardian automaton, to kill them. Thor is enraged that his coronation was interrupted, and so he gathers Loki, now also known as the God of Mischief, close friend Sif, and the Warriors 3, Volstagg, Fandral, and Hogun, to travel to Jotunheim through the Bifrost Bridge, a dimensional energy which allows instantaneous travel within the 9 realms, protected by Heimdall, who could see and hear nearly everything that happens in the 9 realms, but was somehow unable to see the 3 Frost Giants' invasion. They meet with Laufey, king of the Frost Giants, and demand an answer to how his people got into Asgard. Thor becomes angrier as Laufey continues to disrespect him and his father, and although Loki attempts to talk him down, a battle ensues. Things begin to look desperate for the Asgardians, who are surrounded by frost giants, but they're luckily saved by Odin's arrival, who attempts to restore the peace, but Laufey says there will be no reconciliation. Upon returning to Asgard, Odin confronts Thor and Loki. Furious that Thor's dragged Asgard back into war, no longer believing Thor is fit to be king, Odin strips him of his powers and banishes him to Earth, along with his hammer Mjolnir, leaving it protected by an enchantment that deems only the worthy will be able to wield it. Hence why Coulson found the hammer to be immovable by any mortal human. Thor lands in New Mexico and is found by astrophysicist Jane Foster, her assistant Darcy Lewis, and her mentor Dr. Eric Selvig when they hit him with their van. Foster had been studying a mysterious weather event, traveling to where she believed the source of the anomalies to be, and when arriving there, they were met by a wormhole that surrounded them and caused them to crash into Thor. They take Thor to the hospital before heading back to their outpost, where they look into pictures Jane took inside the wormhole and realize Thor's silhouette was inside the vortex. The 3 head back to the hospital, only to learn he's escaped, so they set out to find him, and do so, immediately hitting him with their van again. Meanwhile, back on Asgard, Loki confronts Odin about an odd reaction he had when being touched by a frost giant during their earlier battle, and this leads Odin to reveal he actually adopted Loki following their victory over the frost giants all those years ago, believing Loki could create permanent peace between the races and that Loki is the birth child of Laufey.
You know, it all makes sense now why you favored Thor all these years. Because no matter how much you claim to love me, you could never have a frost giant sitting on the throne of Asgard.
The stress and sadness caused by his sons leaves Odin weak, and he falls into the Odin sleep, a state of deep sleep to restore his power, leaving Loki as interim king of Asgard. Back on Earth, Thor overhears 2 men speaking of an immovable satellite they'd found in the desert. Suspecting it to be Mjolnir, Thor asks Jane to take him there, and says he'll answer any question she may have if she does. Selvig warns her not to, believing Thor is dangerous, so she declines. The 3 return to their outpost, where they're met by Agent Coulson and other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, who are confiscating their equipment and research information surrounding the wormhole, claiming they need it to investigate a security threat, and thanking them for their cooperation. Upset with having to start her research from scratch, Jane picks up Thor and takes him to Mjolnir in order to get information out of him. But when they arrive, they see that S.H.I.E.L.D. has taken over the site it had landed on. Thor breaks in and takes out every guard in front of him, forcing Coulson to send in Special Agent Clint Barton, an expert marksman also known as Hawkeye, to take him out if necessary. Thor eventually makes his way to the hammer, and although Barton has a clean shot on him, an intrigued Coulson calls him off. Thor attempts to lift it but is unable to, shouting in anger at the realization of his powerlessness, and allowing agents to take him into custody. While Thor is in custody, Loki appears and tells him that Odin had died due to the stress caused by Thor's banishment and the threat of a new war, before revealing himself as the new king of Asgard, and that he will not allow Thor to come back home due to his mother Frigga prohibiting his return. Thor apologizes to Loki as he bids him farewell, before Dr. Selvig shows up and manages to get Thor released. Meanwhile, Loki arrives on Jotunheim, and it's revealed that he was behind the Frost Giants' earlier invasion as a way to protect Asgard from his brother's idiotic rule. He offers Laufey an opportunity to kill Odin and return Jotunheim to its former glory, while giving Loki full reign to the throne of Asgard, and Laufey agrees. Upon returning to Asgard, Loki is greeted by a suspicious Heimdall, who can neither see nor hear him while on his trip to Jotunheim. But Loki demands that he obey his new king and to not open the Bifrost to anyone without his approval. Back on Earth, Thor and Jane have a heart-to-heart where he tells her how grateful he is for her kindness towards him, and that she must not give up on her research before the two fall asleep under the stars. While on Asgard, Heimdall allows the Bifrost Bridge to be opened for Sif and the Warriors 3, who don't trust Loki as king, and head to Earth in an attempt to bring Thor back. But when Loki learns of their plans, he sends the Destroyer to follow after them. Loki relieves Heimdall of his duties as gatekeeper, before freezing him using the Casket of Ancient Winters. The four Asgardians find Thor on Earth, and inform him of Loki's lies, but just as they plan to return to Asgard, the Destroyer lands on Earth and attacks them. Thor approaches it and apologizes to Loki, asking him to spare their lives in return for his. Loki agrees, and the Destroyer hits Thor with a fatal strike, but his sacrifice deems him worthy to wield Mjolnir once again, and with his restored power, he's easily able to defeat the Destroyer. He then promises Jane he'll come back for her, before giving her a kiss goodbye, and returns to Asgard through the Bifrost, opened by Heimdall, who fought out of his frozen state. But it appears it's too late, as the Frost Giants have already begun their invasion of Asgard, with Laufey standing over a sleeping Odin. But just as he goes for a fatal stab, Loki kills him, with his plan truly being to gain his father's approval. Loki then begins extending the Bifrost Bridge, so it grows large enough to rip Jotunheim apart, but Thor is able to stop it by using Mjolnir to destroy the Bifrost. He and Loki nearly fall into the void beneath them, but are caught by a now awakened Odin. Loki begs for his father's acceptance, but Odin declines, leading Loki to let himself fall into the deep abyss of space, entering a wormhole created by the sudden termination of the bridge. Thor, saddened by the loss of his brother and inability to see Jane, admits he's not ready to be king, but hopes that someday he can make his father proud. But Odin says he already has. On Earth, Nick Fury meets with Dr. Selvig, saying his work has impressed a lot of people. Fury shows him a glowing blue cube, claiming it could contain unlimited power, and asks if he'd be willing to study it.
Well, I guess that's worth a look.
Well, I guess that's worth a look.
Around this time, researchers uncover the buried wreckage of an aircraft in the Arctic, and inside they find a frozen, circular object with a red, white, and blue symbol. We're then taken back to 1942 during World War II, as Hydra forces led by Johann Schmidt invade Tonsberg, Norway in search of the Tesseract, the same glowing blue cube shown to Selvig in the present day, and which Schmidt describes as once being the jewel of Odin's treasure room. Upon discovering the Tesseract, Schmidt has the churchkeeper who guarded it killed, along with everyone else in the village. We then meet Steve Rogers in Brooklyn, New York, once again being rejected for military duty despite making multiple attempts at different enlistment offices due to his frail frame and numerous health issues, while his best friend James "Bucky" Barnes had already enlisted into the army and is shipping out for England first thing tomorrow. On his last night, he and Steve go to the 1943 Stark Expo, then titled the World Exposition of Tomorrow, where Steve once again attempts to enlist. He's met by Dr. Abraham Erskine, who after overhearing his conversation with Bucky about wanting to help in the war, and seeing he's attempted to enlist 5 different times, allows Rogers to enlist as a candidate for Project Rebirth, an experiment to transform a soldier into a super soldier conducted by the Strategic Scientific Reserve under the supervision of Erskine, Colonel Chester Phillips, and Agent Peggy Carter. Steve's performance during basic training doesn't convince Phillips that he's the right choice for the project, but Erskine says he's looking for qualities beyond the physical, and Phillips relents after seeing Rogers commit an act of self-sacrificing bravery. Erskine meets with Steve the night ahead of the experiment and tells him of his days in Germany being forced to work for Nazis. Hitler sent Johann Schmidt of Hydra, which at the time was the Nazi science division, to work alongside Erskine, and when Schmidt learned of Erskine's super soldier formula, he injected himself with an imperfect version of the serum, and suffered negative side effects. Erskine says the serum can make a good man great, but can make a bad man worse, so he tells Steve to promise him that he'll always stay who he is.
Not a perfect soldier, but a good man.
The next day, Erskine, with the help of Howard Stark, performs the experiment on Steve in front of US government officials. It appears the experiment has gone wrong when Steve screams from inside of the chamber, so Peggy, who's grown fond of Steve, shouts for them to shut it down, but Steve convinces them to keep going. And when the experiment is complete, Steve emerges from the chamber much taller with an enhanced physique. As they celebrate, there's a sudden explosion caused by a Hydra assassin, Heinz Kruger, who then shoots down and kills Erskine, before taking a bottle of the serum and running off. Steve chases after and eventually catches up to Kruger, using his new superhuman speed and strength, causing Kruger to drop the serum before biting down on a cyanide pill to avoid interrogation. Meanwhile, Schmidt and Dr. Arnim Zola have weaponized the Tesseract, first using it against 3 Nazi officers, and Hydra looks to take over the world, no longer interested in being in Hitler's shadow. With Erskine dead and the super soldier formula lost, the SSR is ordered to join the war and engage Hydra directly. And although Steve wants to join the fight, Phillips leaves him behind so scientists can study him in hopes of rediscovering Erskine's formula. but Steve instead accepts an offer from Senator Brandt to tour the nation for the USO to promote war donations as Captain America. Although he's happy to contribute towards the war in some way, he still seeks a more direct role alongside those fighting. Following an unwelcomed performance in front of active soldiers, he's comforted by Peggy, who tells him he was meant for more than being a lab rat or a dancing monkey. It turns out the audience he just performed in front of was what's left of the 107th Infantry Regiment, which Steve recognizes as Bucky's unit. After learning that Bucky was amongst those killed or captured by Hydra, he and Peggy go against Colonel Phillips' orders and get a plane ride from Howard Stark behind enemy lines. He successfully frees most of the captive soldiers who gain possession of Hydra's advanced weapons and use them to escape, before also finding Bucky still alive. But as they attempt to escape, the factory begins to self-destruct. Schmidt had set the place to detonate after seeing his men outnumbered and a super soldier on the battlefield. As Steve and Bucky try to find a way out, they're met by Schmidt, who reveals his red skull, a side effect of the imperfect super soldier serum, before escaping. Steve and Bucky still manage to escape along with the rest of the captive soldiers and return to base. Now, after gaining the respect of Colonel Phillips and being given a shield made of vibranium by Howard Stark, he begins leading his own unit alongside Bucky against Hydra. Over the next 2 years, his unit successfully disrupts multiple Hydra operations, but tragedy strikes during an attack on a train carrying Arnim Zola when Bucky is shot outside of the train and falls to his presumed death. They do still manage to capture Zola though, and when asked what Schmidt's target is, he says his target is everywhere. Peggy comforts Steve following the loss of his best friend and convinces him to use his sorrow as motivation to put an end to Hydra, so he and his unit head to the final Hydra stronghold and attack Schmidt and his army. During the ensuing battle, Schmidt nearly escapes in Hydra's Valkyrie aircraft, but Steve, with the help of Phillips and after a farewell kiss from Peggy, climbs on board, and after fighting off Schmidt's guards, he has a one-on-one brawl with the Red Skull, during which the machine containing the Tesseract is destroyed. Schmidt tries to physically handle the Tesseract, but this opens a wormhole into space, which he is then sucked into, with the cube then falling to the floor and burning through the plane down into the ocean. Steve, though, sees no way to safely land the plane without detonating its weapons, so he makes a radio call to Peggy and says he has to put it in the water. Earlier, he and Peggy had spoken about one day sharing a dance, and so in their final moments together, they make plans for said dance before Steve's line cuts off. He sacrifices himself and drowns with the aircraft in the ocean. Howard Stark manages to recover the Tesseract, but they're unable to find Steve or the aircraft. We next see Steve when he awakens in a hospital room, but he notices something's off when he recognizes the baseball game playing on the radio to be one he attended himself. Guards enter the room, but he breaks out and runs off into the middle of Times Square, where he's met by Nick Fury, who informs him he's been asleep for nearly 70 years. Later, Nick Fury, along with Lieutenant Agent Maria Hill, arrives at the Joint Dark Energy Mission facility, where Dr. Selvig holds experiments regarding the Tesseract. There, they are met by Agent Coulson, who informs them that the Tesseract's behavior has become unstable, emitting low levels of gamma radiation. With the Tesseract being a doorway to the end of space, Clint Barton suspects that its unstable behavior is being caused by something at the other end. Suddenly, the Tesseract opens a portal from which Loki appears, armed with a scepter containing the Mind Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones. After falling into the deep abyss of space, Loki encountered the Other, the servant of a mysterious warlord who, in exchange for recovering the Tesseract, promised Loki command over the Chitauri, their army of cyborgs, as well as possession of the scepter to conquer humanity. Upon his arrival, Loki immediately kills multiple S.H.I.E.L.D. agents before using his scepter to enslave a few of them, including Dr. Selvig and Barton, whom he orders to shoot down Fury before aiding him in his escape with the Tesseract as the facility blows up due to the portal collapsing in on itself. Fury, Hill, and Coulson manage to survive the explosion, and Fury proclaims that they are now at war and reactivates the Avengers Initiative. Agent Natasha Romanoff is sent to recruit Dr. Bruce Banner so that he can trace the gamma signature emitted from the Tesseract, while Fury meets with Steve Rogers and Coulson meets with Tony Stark, both being called in for help against Loki. Meanwhile, in Germany, Loki attacks a man and uses a holograph of his eye to open a vault containing iridium needed to stabilize the Tesseract, but he's soon met by Captain America and Black Widow, and a fight between him and Cap ensues. But as the fight unravels, Iron Man shows up and Loki willingly surrenders. Although they're suspicious as to why he gave up so easily, they still plan to escort Loki onto the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, an advanced flying command center that doubles as an aircraft carrier, when they hear sudden rumblings of thunder above them.
What's the matter? Scared of a little lightning? I'm not overly fond of what follows.
Thor arrives on board and after taking out Cap and Iron Man, exits the aircraft with Loki. With the Bifrost being destroyed, Odin had to channel dark energy to send Thor back to Earth so he could stop Loki and bring him back to Asgard along with the Tesseract. Cap and Iron Man see Thor as a threat though, so the three brawl before eventually agreeing to work together. They then transport and imprison Loki on the helicarrier, where Thor informs them of his plan to use the Tesseract to open a portal into space and bring the Chitauri army to Earth. Stark then joins Banner in locating the Tesseract, but appears suspicious of what S.H.I.E.L.D.'s true intentions are surrounding it, which in turn causes Cap to question it as well. Meanwhile, Romanoff speaks to Loki in an attempt to get information on Barton's whereabouts, claiming she owes him a debt. We learn that before joining S.H.I.E.L.D., Romanoff got on their radar in a bad way, and Barton was sent to kill her, but he made a different call and recruited her instead. Loki calls her pathetic for trying to bargain for his life in hopes of wiping her ledger clean of the blood she's left in her path. and says he only plans on killing Barton after he forces him to kill her. She calls him a monster, but he responds saying she brought the real monster. Turns out this was all an interrogation tactic to manipulate Loki into revealing his plan to unleash the Hulk. Throughout this, Cap, Stark, and Banner have discovered that S.H.I.E.L.D. plans on using the Tesseract to develop weapons, but Fury explains Earth needs weaponry to combat threats just as, if not more powerful than the likes of Thor. Tensions rise between the heroes, with Tony and Cap having a heated back and forth before a sudden explosion caused by Barton and Loki's other enslaved agents separates them and disables one of the helicarrier's flight engines. The attack causes Banner to transform into the Hulk and chase after Romanoff, forcing Thor to intervene and battle the monster. Fury has Hill send a fighter jet to prevent Hulk from destroying the aircraft, leading to Hulk leaping onto the jet and tearing it apart before hurtling towards the ground, later being found alive by a security guard. Meanwhile, Barton boards the helicarrier and fights Romanoff, who eventually knocks him out, breaking Loki's control over him, while Stark and Cap successfully repair the ship's engine. But Loki still manages to escape imprisonment, trapping Thor inside of his cell and ejecting him out of the aircraft. He's then approached by Coulson, armed with one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s new advanced weapons, but Loki uses his illusions against him and kills him with the scepter, before escaping the aircraft. Fury uses Coulson's death to motivate Cap and Stark to work together, and together they realize that Loki plans to open the wormhole atop of Stark Tower in New York City to satisfy his massive ego. So Stark heads to the tower and finds that Selvig has completed building the device to open the wormhole. He attempts to destroy it with a blast, but its barrier of pure energy is unbreachable, and the blast sends him and Selvig flying back, with Selvig being knocked out. The device activates and the Chitauri army enters through it, attacking the people of New York as Loki watches from afar. Thor, Cap, Romanoff, and Barton arrive, and rally together to battle the Chitauri, with Banner arriving soon after. With the Hulk now firmly on their side, the Avengers assemble together for the first time, but Nick Fury's superiors don't believe the Avengers will be enough to stop Loki and his army, and so they send a nuclear missile towards Midtown Manhattan. Meanwhile, Hulk finds Loki and beats him into submission, while Romanoff meets with Selvig, now no longer under Loki's control, who reveals that Loki's scepter can shut down the generator and close the wormhole. Stark is warned about the incoming missile by Fury, so he intercepts it and flies with it up into the wormhole, sending it straight into the Chitauri mothership, disabling their army. But this causes Stark's suit to shut down, and he falls uncontrollably back through the wormhole, just as Romanoff closes it. Luckily, Hulk catches him as he falls, and the Avengers each survive the battle. Following the Battle of New York, they each go their separate ways, with Thor returning to Asgard with Loki and the Tesseract. But Fury expresses belief that when needed, the Avengers will return once again. Out in the emptiness of space, the other meets with his master and shares concerns that humanity may be more powerful than they originally thought. But his master, revealed to be the Mad Titan Thanos, turns to him with a sadistic smile. And that was our recap of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments your favorite MCU project of Phase 1. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.